Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has rejected as theatrical Russia's proposal for a 3-day ceasefire in honor of the 80th anniversary of the Soviet Union's victory over Nazi Germany in World War II. Zelensky offered a 1-month truce instead. An unconditional ceasefire is the model proposed by the Americans. We are following that model. Whether it starts on that date or another, ideally earlier. Yes, let's try for 30 days. Why a 30-day ceasefire? Because it's impossible to reach any agreements in 3, 5, or even 7 days, Zelensky told reporters on Saturday. Putin offered a temporary truce for 7 to 9 of May during the annual Victory Day parade in Moscow. Meanwhile, Zelensky stated that Ukraine cannot guarantee safety of foreign representatives planning to attend the May 9th parade, stressing that responsibility for security in Russia lies solely with the Russian authorities. We cannot be held responsible for what happens in the Russian Federation. They provide your security, and we will not offer any guarantees. We do not know what Russia will do during these dates. They may carry out actions such as arson or explosions and then attempt to blame Ukraine, Zelensky said during the press briefing. Earlier this week, the Ukrainian leader said the May 9th Victory Day parade may not be held. Writing in his social media account, Zelensky said, "They should be worried because the war is going on. They should end the war. This means that there is the possibility of an attack on Moscow that day."
Ukrainian counterattacks pushed the Russians out of several key positions, endangering their whole operation to encircle Pokrovsk. As a result, the Russians were forced to completely abandon their attempts to take the town, started retreating, and changed their goal to achieve political victory without any strategic value instead. Euromaidan Press reports. After advancing to Pokrovsk, Russian forces set their sights on encircling the city from the west to sever its vital logistical lines and forcing Ukrainian defenders to abandon it under threat of encirclement. The Russians hoped to avoid the brutal urban battles that had previously drained their forces in Bakhmut and now at Toretsk. The idea was to isolate Pokrovsk without having to storm it directly and achieve at least a less costly victory. However, this plan soon fell apart. Ukrainian forces first managed to halt the Russian advance westward and then began a series of aggressive counterattacks to reclaim key positions. Euromaidan Press says Ukrainian tactics were highly mobile and adaptive, using thunder runs with swift, small unit assaults designed to shock and disorient entrenched Russian forces. One of the major blows was dealt at Kotlin, where Ukrainians executed rapid attacks to disrupt the Russian presence in the village and its surrounding industrial zone. They successfully isolated Russian troops holding these areas, forcing them to abandon positions under relentless Ukrainian drone strikes and artillery harassment. The breakthrough at Kotlin allowed Ukrainian forces to expand their operations under the new command of General Major Mikhailo Drapati, who had previously orchestrated successes during the Kharkiv and Kherson counteroffensives. The Ukrainians shifted focus to crippling Russian logistics by systematically disrupting supply lines, and as dozens of roads in this sector quickly became littered with destroyed vehicles and manpower, Ukrainians made it nearly impossible for Russian units to receive reinforcements, food, or even water, as Russian troops resorted to using horses and donkeys to deliver basic supplies. Euromaidan Press says, exploiting this and their superiority in drone warfare, Ukraine pushed forward and retook critical positions around Uspenivka, Udachne, Pishchane, Shevchenko, Dachensk, and Lysivka, driving Russian forces back from the outskirts of Pokrovsk. The result of these Ukrainian counterattacks has been decisive, as Russian activity on the western flank has notably decreased. Facing mounting casualties and dwindling reserves, Russia has now shifted its focus southward. Overall, the Russian attempt to encircle Pokrovsk has collapsed under the weight of effective Ukrainian counterattacks and relentless pressure. Forced to abandon their grandiose plans, Russian forces now chase much less ambitious objectives, capturing largely empty fields without any strategic value. Russian dictator Vladimir Putin may have shifted the focus of his war against Ukraine to more immediate goals. The Kremlin wants to strengthen its position in the already occupied territories of Ukraine and boost its struggling economy. This is according to new intelligence reviewed by US and Western officials, CNN reports, citing informed sources. Notably, Western intelligence agencies recently claimed that Putin believed that the state of war was in his interests and that he had the momentum and manpower to wage a longer fight and seize all of Ukraine. CNN sources say the perception that Putin has changed his tune has played into the hands of US President Donald Trump and his negotiators, who believe the dictator may be more willing to consider a peace deal. But some senior US officials remain skeptical of Putin and his claims of a desire for peace. And there is widespread concern that even if Russia agrees to the US proposed deal, which would give Russia control over some Ukrainian territory, Moscow could, in the long term, resume fighting to try to seize more Ukrainian land. Here is how a high-ranking Western intelligence officer describes the situation. I think that Putin is perhaps thinking, I don't want to say that he is thinking about less, but he is thinking about what a reasonable goal is for the near future. It all depends on what the United States is willing to put on the table so that Putin can not just claim victory domestically, but actually feel like he has achieved something that is worth a significant pause and then perhaps resume the fight at some point later, he added. The interlocutor recalled that Putin has repeatedly pontificated about the historical origins of the Russian people, and seizing most of Ukraine is his long-term goal, at least those parts that are the cradle of Russian civilization in Putin's eyes. One European official agrees that Moscow is prepared to play along with the US and limit its short-term goals in the war. In this way, the Kremlin may try to improve relations with Washington. However, Russia has clearly not abandoned its maximalist goals in the war. According to the official, Moscow believes that improving relations with the United States will distract attention after a tactical pause, and then they will be able to use a combination of military, economic, informational, and political tools to achieve all of Putin's goals in Ukraine and beyond. At the same time, a senior US official noted that Russia's goal is to gain recognition for as much occupied territory as possible and have as weak a Ukraine as possible. There is no sign that Putin will actually be able to conquer the rest of Ukraine when his forces have long had no major breakthroughs on the front. So any shift in Putin's thinking is explained by this awareness and the US effort to force Ukraine and Russia to agree to end the war. But there have long been doubts among Western officials and intelligence officers that Putin and his circle are negotiating honestly rather than simply trying to drag out the process and continue their military aggression.